guys, and welcome to another episode of Sustain This with Vivobarefoot. This podcast is about cutting through all the bullshit and empowering people with courage and knowledge, and our goal is to make these conversations as super authentic and as real as possible. We are joined today by two guests to celebrate B Corp Month, a global annual campaign to raise awareness and understanding of the B Corp logo and what it means. Thomas Bourne and Dirk Bischof are passionate advocates for business being a force for good. They are both dedicated advisors to Vivobarefoot and active members on the board of our Live Barefoot Fund. If you have any questions for us after the episode, get in touch at sustainthis@vivobarefoot.com, and remember to leave us a review on any of the social platforms. You can search by tagging @Vivobarefoot. Happy B Corp Month. All right. Thank you very much for joining us, Dirk and Tom. It's great to have you here.
Morning.
Nice to see you. Thanks for asking us.
So I am joining this conversation today from Australia. It is nighttime here, and I've just got back from the beach, which is glorious. And both of you are joining us from the UK today. Is that right?
That's
awesome.
Right.
Great. So we're here to talk about the topic of B Corp certification. It is officially B Corp month this month, which means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I think it's a big occasion to celebrate becoming a B Corp, being a B Corp, and what it means to be a social business. So I'm going to kick straight over to you, Dirk, and ask you, what does it mean to be a B Corp?
I think what it means to be a B Corp is to not only look at the age-old driver of all business, which was profit, but to look more widely and look at the real impact that business has on the world, on both people and the planet, and trying to really synchronize our activities and internalize externalities, whether they're pollution, whether they are social factors, but in-house them as opposed to kind of push them out again for the sake of profit.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Tom, what does it mean to you? How have you kind of how have you defined it?
Well, I think Dirk's touched on some really good tangible kind of factors. I think there is also something less tangible about B Corp that people often describe as, when I found B Corp, I found my tribe. And that's certainly how I feel. I stumbled through early stages of my career with that kind of classic values misalignment, doing careers that didn't really match who I was because I hadn't taken the time to think that through. And when B Corp landed in the UK in 2015, and I saw the front page of the website, I just thought, this is it. This is what I need to do. This is what I need to align with, because it basically is everything I believe. So I think there is something really visceral about the values that it represents, and people feel they find their tribe when they stumble across B Corp. But for businesses, now I think what's really exciting for me is that kind of excitement around finding purpose and values is really where a lot of businesses are starting to get on the bus and have the conversations that sustainability professionals have been having for years. So I think it's a great accelerant towards the right way of doing business.
So you've touched briefly there on the cultural element of what it means to be a B Corp and the impact that has on your kind of, the working culture, so your values in an organization. And Dirk, you've talked about probably a little bit more of the practical side, which is how you actually integrate more of that social and environmental impact into a business. I mean, in reality, how hard is it to actually become a B Corp? And I guess maybe Tom, I'll go straight back to you because I know that you have a lot of experience in this.
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer is it is very difficult, and rightly so. It should be, because to be a certified B Corp means that you are verified to be operating at very high standards of social and environmental responsibility. So it shouldn't be a walk in the park. I often describe it as being almost impossible to greenwash. That's the point of having a really clear and constantly evolving set of standards and a verification process. So yeah, it's heavy work, but it's extremely rewarding. And every business I've known who's done it has got a lot of value from it.
How about you, Dirk? Is it something that you that you kind of, you know, you can appreciate the gravity of how much is involved in it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, we are advising a lot of organizations through our programs on how to start and get off the ground, and often registering, you know, your business with various entities is part and parcel of that journey. But yeah, I would also say kind of B Corp is, you know, the gold standard for organizations these days who really want to talk the talk and walk the walk, essentially, on really like doing business differently, doing business in a way that, you know, doesn't wreck the planet, but also doesn't, you know, exploit people, you know, whether it's immediately within the business or all the way throughout supply chains. And like as Tom was saying, it's important that it's difficult and that people have to jump through these hoops and figure out their impact measurement and reporting, etc. And it's important that it's not an easy stamp of approval.
I think it's really interesting that both of you have backgrounds in what we kind of refer to as social business, and you quite obviously have personal stories, which I'd like to come to in a little bit, but as to why you feel passionate about this. But I guess I'm interested, Dirk, how, when you found B Corp, was it this wonderful moment where you were like, oh, this is a legitimate thing that companies can use to kind of actually show that they actually care? It's not just going to be words. I mean, do you feel like you can trust in the program enough so that it is that place that you can go to if you want to show the world that you are a socially minded business?
I think, in all honesty, we're still very much at the beginning of purposeful businesses. Like if you look at this in waves, we're still now like this still feels like day one, or it still feels like week one of businesses pushing to be more purposeful. And there are many other, like I think there are a lot of people and organizations out there who've worked really hard to figure out how organizations can measure their impact. I think there's the impact project, and we've looked at various kind of methods of measuring impact, and many of them are very hard to implement. Like if you're a large business and you're trying to implement this, it's going to take you a very long time to do so. But I think it's the right way to do it, because if you don't measure it, or like if you don't measure your impact, you can't manage it, as the old saying goes. So I think currently B Corp is, as I said, the gold standard. But people have been trying to measure things that, you know, if left unmeasured, can cause real kind of, you know, tragedies, you know, further down the supply chains, or cause tragedies by just polluting rivers, etc. So I think B Corp is important, and I think currently still there needs to be more synergy, I think, around what other standards are out there and how they compare to it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's certainly something that I personally feel very strongly about. Just this kind of massive amounts of standards and criteria that we're expected to kind of measure ourselves against these days. It's pretty overwhelming. I mean, Tom, do you think it's something that we'll be able to get to, where it is just B Corp that is the one thing, or that there is some kind of cohesive thing that we can look to? Because I know that both of you work with a lot of small to medium-sized businesses, startups and entrepreneurial organizations. So if it's hard for us in the bigger businesses, I can't even imagine, you know, how difficult it must be for smaller brands.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges with impact is that it's as broad as it is wide as it is long, and it's a bit like trying to stick a pin in jelly, trying to define impact sometimes. And there are, you know, you've got impact as a kind of you know, I guess as a branch, as a facet of responsible business. But so does B Corp have all the answers? Probably not. Is it the best architecture for a business to put in place to start managing their impact? Absolutely. And I think as a is an MOT for a business to across all aspects of ES and G, across the entire gamut of their operations and their business model. I genuinely think it will take a long time to find something that is as holistic, as accessible, as well defined, as user friendly, as sort of, you know, evolving as B Corp is. Does it capture every aspect, every possible aspect of impact and allow a business to measure it? Probably not. Does it give all the answers in terms of getting business A from degenerative through to a perfect regenerative, you know, position? Probably not. But it is absolutely, in my view, the best place to get on the bus.
And it's important to have a starting position, right? I mean, a lot of people are overwhelmed, isn't it? Like if they're thinking like, you know, how can I go from zero to something? And often people, you know, need to figure out, or people or business leaders need to figure out like where they can make, where they can put a stake in the ground and say, we start here. And, you know, B Corp, you know, accreditation, certification might be, you know, years off, but it's really important to kind of make a start and get going by figuring out an aspect, an element, you know, a department, or you know, figure out a starting point, and then keep going, keep measuring, keep comparing, keep changing.
I'm really fascinated by that dichotomy actually between it needing to be something that customers can trust. So it needs to be rigorous enough so that when you say you've got that stamp, that you can be sure that that thing, you know, where you're putting your money, if you're literally choosing between a packet of oats, right, and you're going to go for the one that's a B Corp because you want to be part of the solution, you need to be able to just trust that stamp. But then at the same time, you've got on the other side this interesting call, which is that it's better to have someone in the B Corp community. It's better to have these businesses within the community so that they are being held accountable to that framework. They are answering to that messaging, even if they're not performing against that impact right now. Actually, it probably is arguably better that they do have that stamp, because then you know that at least they're working on it. I don't know. I mean, do either of you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's important to recognize that the minimum threshold to be a B Corp is pretty high, and it is way higher than most businesses are operating at the moment. So yeah, undoubtedly, every business should be operating at that minimum standard. The other 2 points I think that, or the other points were really worth remembering, is that the standards are constantly being nudged up. They're always under review. Every 3 years, there's a new release of the standards that raises the bar a little bit higher, which is as it should be, because regulations develop, expectations develop, our understanding of some of these issues develop. So the bar is raising. And that, in conjunction with the sort of competitive nature of B Corp, if you like, because obviously it's scored and everybody looks into their sector and wants to outdo the score of their competitors. So there is a bit of competitive tension going on that is forcing people to sort of push themselves a little bit against that score. So I think those factors will keep businesses really questioning what can they do to keep progressing against the B Corp standards. And the discussion that we have with every client we work with is, look, certification is not the end of the journey. It's very much just the start. And so B Corp is great in that it gets people involved. It gets people to that minimum threshold. It doesn't, as you know, it's not negatively marked. So there are elements, you know, arguably kind of critical elements of impact management that you don't have to have in place to be a B Corp. But you know, we always focus on, you know, those really important foundational principles around, you know, impact assessment, materiality assessment, stakeholder engagement, and building a firm strategy off the back of it. If you are going to do this properly and you're going to have an upward trajectory in your score and your impact and your, you know, your effectiveness.
Yeah. It's a lot to take in, because it, you know, at the end of the day, I believe it's one of the few things in the kind of business context around sustainability that is meant for customers or consumers or citizens, whatever language you want to use. In the current context, I prefer citizen, but I think that at the same time, we need to make that language, you know, I was just thinking how what you just said then, Tom, could actually be interesting to someone who would turn up in a store and buy one of our products. And that's a really, really difficult balance, I think. And even now, like, you know, the reason we have B Corp month, a big part of that is because it is still something that a lot of people don't understand, and we're not entirely sure whether or not it's actually popular enough to be something that actually is out there. I mean, I'm currently in Australia, and consumerism is just nuts out here. And I actually feel a little bit overwhelmed by that. And when I'm kind of in the mall, as it was, I don't know if I would choose something with B Corp right now, because it's kind of, I don't know if it would actually inform my choice. I don't know, Dirk, from what you've seen, do you feel like it's actually getting to the point now where there might be a tipping point around consumer choice with B Corp?
I mean, if you look at you know, the 1970s, 80s, 90s, you know, like when buying organic versus buying non-organic wasn't really a thing, but then over time people have chosen to buy organic, and they looked at the organic certifications, etc. You know, that took decades for it to be implemented. And now people are making choices based on whether food stuff that they eat is organic or not organic, which often, you know, like people will associate it with, you know, better living conditions, like if they're buying eggs, for example, or better soil conditions, or, you know, the area being treated better. But it, you know, it now seems that, you know, buying organic is going way down people's like it's becoming less important, I think, if we have to consider all of the impacts that businesses are creating on their environment, on people, etc. So I think a new standard needs to be pushed and needs to come to the fore. But I think, as with everything, it's a marketing and a branding job and an awareness job. So I think, and that's often a challenge or an issue, even with businesses who often do great work, but then how well do they communicate about the great work that they're doing? So, you know, B Corp is doing all the great work already, but how well are they communicating currently to, you know, to the masses, like how important, you know, B Corp versus non-B Corp is. And then, you know, like one example is like Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's, you know, started as a really small company. They had all these great principles, and eventually they became a B Corp, and eventually they got bought up by Unilever. So now, you know, I always feel like, you know, Ben and Jerry's within Unilever can also instill a lot of change within a very large business. And I think that's really important, where the smaller businesses might get a head start around certification, around accreditation. And eventually, like if that's their goal, to be bought up or to be acquired, essentially, they could bring all of this within a much larger corporate structure and then influence things from within, so to speak. So I'm feeling there's a lot of flux in the sector. Both there needs to be more marketing and branding, I think, but then also I think businesses who are really serious and are looking to grow and scale and are looking to be and become acquired, they are much more valuable being a B Corp than not being a B Corp. And I think, you know, this will all instill more consumer confidence with these brands growing and scaling, etc.
Yeah, I'm super interested to know whether or not you think that it will get to the point where it's part of like business as usual, whether or not it would be something that it's a legal requirement when you're starting a business or you know, kind of growing a business to actually become a B Corp, and then subsequently also, Dirk, what that would mean for the definition of social business, because you have quite a unique perspective on working quite widely across the charity sector. And I guess I am old enough now to be able to say that I was around when charity and philanthropy was the only way to talk about impact in a business. So do you think that we'll get to the point where social business is just business?
I mean, that's the dream, right? I think that's where we're looking to go. Because I mean, ultimately, like, you know, we got to this point in time, and I'm feeling like we're on the cliff's edge at the moment, and there's, you know, we're being held by a really thin thread. If you look at you know, climate catastrophe, climate crisis, you know, fisheries depleting, like the world, I think, like if you look at it more broadly, the world currently is just on the cliff's edge, and there's not much that's missing from really kind of just pushing us over. You know, the pandemic was one example that all made us pause and reflect and rethink. But then if you look at all the data that's out there, you know, CO2 levels are rising again. People, people's pent up demand for buying shit. It's just going to mean like, well, as soon as this pandemic's over, we're flying again, we're traveling, left, right, and center, we're buying stuff again, and we're going back. Are we going back to business as usual, or was this pause and this moment of reflection, was it good enough? But like,
Tom, I know you feel really passionately about this, because I know we've had discussions before around. I know it's easy to do, but a kind of consumer versus system change debate over where the onus is on. I mean, do you personally think that social business will just be normal business in the future, and does the drive come from the consumer, or does the drive come from the big corporations in the system?
Yeah, I think we are, I was going to say, inching towards a point where this will become business as usual. I think actually it's more than inching. I think we are we are rocketing towards that point. And ultimately, this question about what is the purpose of business in the world has come to the fore much more in the last 12, 24 months than it has probably in the last decade. And a lot of it hinges, and I think you're right to sort of question what are the legal duties on businesses, because I think a lot of it hinges on that. Effectively, this balance between shareholder primacy and actually stakeholder interdependence, which is of course completely at the core of what being a B Corp is all about. As you know, when you become a B Corp, you have to change your constitutional documents to disapply the notion of, we're just here to serve shareholders. We're actually here to take account of our entire stakeholder group and make decisions based on what's in all their interests, which is not a million miles away from certainly what company law in the UK already says. But it's just that, actually, who are we here for first and foremost? Is it just our shareholders, or is it our wider stakeholder group? And I think when you see groups like the Business Roundtable in the US come out with a very clear position on that, when you see some of the mainstream media start, so the Financial Times start to talk in those terms, I think the oil tanker is turning pretty fast. Can we rely on a consumer or citizen-led shift to achieve that? I don't think there is going to be any one actor that achieves it or makes it happen over any other. I think we are battling in the consumer mindset, obviously, the natural human tendencies to want more and want newer and want bigger and want faster. And we need to develop a way of doing business and growing the economy that doesn't fetter those kind of instincts or those desires, which is why I think some of the notions in the circular economy are so interesting, because you can have growth and newness and innovation, but without just endlessly depleting the resources of the planet. So I think it has got to be a whole system change. It has got to be regulated. It's got to come from brands wanting to innovate because they understand the risks and the opportunities. And yes, it's got to come from the citizen as well. So it's everyone, it's everything. I'm endlessly optimistic that it'll happen. I think we can see the signs everywhere.
Not overwhelming at all. We don't need to change the world at all. I mean, that's actually,
we've got people like,
people like all of us.
People like you, I was going to say, Emma.
Oh God, I really accept that, but I'm sitting here after walking around the mall today, and I feel exceptionally guilty for doing that. So I think it's so contextual, and actually it's really crazy, because it's really been such a mind fuck for me out here, because the Australians seem so untouched by the pandemic, by the environmental situation, by even like politics to a degree, because a lot of their media is so one-sided and one-voiced. So it seems almost it seems almost a dreamland out here, and maybe not for all the right reasons. But I know that you've had like quite an interesting background, Dirk, in terms of how you got involved into social business in the first place. I am really interested. I kind of wrote down that you've studied human behavior before, and I want to understand how you feel like studying anthropology, which is obviously the study of human behavior. How has that kind of informed your journey, and how has it kind of led you to where you are now?
Well, I really stumbled into studying anthropology, both at kind of bachelor and master's level, because I just found it fascinating. Like, I was the only person in university who did business and anthropology, because I felt like organizations are, I felt like both seem necessary. Organizations are a driving force, for good or bad. But I felt studying humans or studying culture, which is what I was really interested in, studying organizational culture and organizational behavior. I think this is where I thought a new way of doing things could be emerging. But I didn't know this at the time, which is almost 15, 16, 17 years ago now. But it's been a really interesting thing to get involved in, to then run an organization and help other people start and grow their own businesses. And continuing, like, we've heard it before, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you have people who are unaligned to what's going on, around their values and around how they work together, then, you could have the greatest strategy to change the world. But if you're not aligned, within, so to speak, around vision and values and mission, then very quickly, you can just lose your way. So I've always felt that it's really important that you look at the people inside a business and not just what it does.
How does that influence what you do then, Tom? Because obviously you have a lot of companies come to you and ask them to help guide them and support them through getting B Corp. I mean, is there any situations, obviously you don't have to name names, but where they approach you and you go like, whoa, go sort your culture out first, then we'll talk about getting B Corp?
Good question. I mean, I think, one of the first sense checks when we're, having opening discussions with potential clients around what's the culture like at the top, what's the leadership culture, and the situations where we might be tempted to, or actually sort of say, we're not the right partnership, is where, this is not being really led from the top, where the interest in B Corp and impact is superficially supported perhaps by somebody senior, but isn't actually being driven by somebody with passion. Because you see in so many businesses time and time again, the successful ones, the ones who really integrate impact really successfully, are the ones where the leaders say, do you know what, I just, come hell or high water, we are doing this because it really, really matters. So I think that's always the bit to probe. I think you can sort out the rest of the culture, because there is not a lot not to like about becoming a B Corp and the culture that is ingrained, and it is so naturally aligned with the way that people want to think and do their work. I think as long as you've got that leadership piece, the rest will follow.
It's kind of disappointing in a little way, isn't it, that one of the victims of COVID, I suppose, was that the job market. And I guess that I felt like we were kind of getting into a place where companies were caring about attracting talent, younger talent coming out of university, et cetera, and that they were overwhelmingly kind of saying that they wanted to work for B Corps. And now obviously everyone's kind of settling for whatever job they can get right now. And obviously it's a huge generalization, but it's a bit of a shame, isn't it, that kind of hasn't been able to continue on an upwards trajectory.
That's a tough one, I think, because you go, Tom.
I'm not sure I'm seeing that. And I think, and obviously the effects you're talking about are very sector specific, but certainly the interest in companies going through B Corp has absolutely skyrocketed since the start of the pandemic. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And my best measure of that is how busy we are. And we've doubled in size in the last 12 months. And we plan to double in size again this year, because, it's just a flood at the moment. And these companies, a lot of them are recruiting, and a lot of them are recruiting on the basis of, we want to be a better business. So yeah, I'm not sure I do see that play through.
That's really positive.
Go on. I can say that pretty much the same things from what we're seeing with some of the startups and early stage growth businesses. The ones that have really strong social values and really strong ethics, people are trusting them more to do the right thing. And we've seen a massive shift away from, you know, business as usual to more purpose-driven businesses, and how busy they got if given the exposure, if given, you know, the and if they have the branding and the marketing behind them to just shout about what they're doing and why they're different. We've seen them grow really, really quickly in the last 12 months. And it might, you know, only be in a small subsection of the market, because I do think like the big corporates need to start addressing things, and they need to start engaging with B Corp as a certification. But I think we're seeing definitely a slow but unstoppable shift towards more purposeful businesses.
That's really positive to hear. I wonder if we can do a survey to try and figure out exactly how real that is. I do wonder, because obviously B Corp was one of those things that kind of started in the US and has remained pretty US centric, but obviously is moving out towards global locations. And one of the things that they talk about in B Corp is actually asking your stakeholders to also become B Corps as well, and they encourage that. And we have actually been taken aback by some of the interest from where we sell our product, but certainly in terms of where we make it and manufacturing sites. B Corp is competing with lots of other different certifications and programs that they would probably, if they had time and money, invest in first. But I don't know, I think it would be great to see it kind of take that kind of sitting position on being the thing to do once you've kind of woken up to the realities of the situation.
I was going to talk about value chains and the importance of value chains, because I think, you know, there's an important dimension to this debate, which is that we don't let ourselves think that, you know, doing business in a B Corp way is the, you know, is the preserve of enlightened businesses in any particular region. And yes, it's global. Yes, it's still quite US centric. The UK market is actually growing faster than I think any other B Corp market in the world at the moment. But, you know, it is still going to be led by, I guess, the businesses in the privileged enough position to be able to do it. And there is therefore a risk that it becomes a bit of an echo chamber thing. But one of the ways to really blow that apart is by, particularly for brands, is to really get engaged with value chains, you know, global value chains, about, you know, what does it mean to do business in this way? How can we help you improve the social and environmental performance of your business and benefit your wider communities? Because I think the pyramid responsibility of brands in that context and the ripple effect of their impact is just immensely, the power of that is immense. So that's a bit I get really excited about. How can we actually push this down to have a real impact on people who most need it across the world?
Yeah, and I suppose the subsequent part of that is also allowing the program itself, which is global in nature, to bring the faces out. I think they were so guilty, especially in the footwear and fashion industry, of having faceless supply chains or faceless distribution networks, or you know. And so I'm interested when we can get to a point where B Corp in itself becomes a marketplace, where actually you choose supply chains based on who's a B Corp and who's telling their own story through the B Corp network. I wanted to ask you both actually around a bit of a sticky question, but one of the things that I found going through the B Corp process with Vivobarefoot, was that the really big focus they put on environment. And personally, I love that, because that is definitely where my interest in sustainability kind of started and grows. But the thing I did find difficult, and I didn't think they potentially kind of did enough of, was human rights and social engagement. And perhaps that's because there's just so many different ways to slice that piece of bread, you know. Like, how do you actually define it? It's environment is really easier in comparison to metric and to quantify, whereas social engagement and community engagement and programs like that is obviously a lot more difficult. Dirk, did you is it something that you feel like perhaps one was more important than the other in B Corp, or how you think we could maybe improve that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There is, environmental impact is often easier to measure. You're talking in CO2 emitted, or you're talking about things that are more easily quantifiable than, say, human behavior changes, or engage. What does it mean? But then on the flip side, like if you look at some of the social initiatives that you can have within your business, whether you're looking at assessing your gender pay gap, your ethnicity pay gap, whether you're looking at volunteering within your company, there are many parts where you can make a start, and you don't have to just look at B Corp and the B Corp accreditation. You can always go beyond and say, well, we think this is really important, and B Corp. B Corp in its current existence, places more value, or seems to place more value on environmental performance. But then, there's nothing that stops an individual business from going beyond and say, we also care about all the social side of things, and we'll implement other programs on top. I think, again, it's a minimum standard. It's a high minimum standard of how to do business better. But it's not to say that, you should just stop there and not engage with things that, for example, your most important stakeholders, your own staff and employees, are looking to get involved in, and what are they passionate about, because it's all about also bringing out their passion in the business, and then helping people to realize these passions through work, because we spend how many days at work and how many days not at work. So it makes a lot of sense to look at that as well.
Yeah, Tom, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective. I think generally the B Corp standards are pretty well balanced across E, S, and G. And I take completely the point that the environmental aspects are easier to measure and in some cases to manage, although ironically, it's certainly with smaller businesses, it's always the section of the impact assessment that they find most challenging. Because it is more technical, it does require, some specific knowledge. And, there is a kind of, sheesh, where do we start with, oh my goodness, they even talk to us about scope 3, So I think that whereas, volunteering programs, worker benefits, those sorts of things are quite easy to wrap your arms around. I think it all converges on the value chain. As I said before, I think, this is where, for me, environment and social aspects really come together and give businesses an opportunity to, kind of leverage their influence and do some innovative things. But yeah, and I wonder also to an extent if we're coming out of several years of very heavy focus on environmental issues, and through the lens of the pandemic, having a bit of rebalancing around social inequalities, a very healthy and timely and much needed rebalancing. But I wonder if partly that's the context.
I think that's really funny that you say that, actually, because I've obviously spent the last kind of 10 years in fashion and footwear now. But I came from oil and gas beforehand, and actually I was really shocked at how in fashion and footwear, especially in terms of the value chain and manufacturing, that the focus was overwhelmingly on forced labor, child issues, health and safety, and audits around ethical trade and human rights. And then kind of when they got to it, they might have considered few environmental things. And I actually always found that quite interesting, that it was kind of always an afterthought. And I got quite passionately naive throughout my kind of teenage years, thinking that actually, what's the point of making people happier, or worrying too much about social issues? Because if you don't have air to breathe, you don't have water to drink, you don't have food to eat, you don't have an environment, then it's all a bit moot point whether or not. But then the counter argument to that is obviously, well, if people aren't happy, then they're not going to love and protect the environment. And I don't know, is that something that either of you have thought about?
I wonder if there's a, regulation is part of the answer to that, because some of those specific social issues that you touched on are obviously very heavily and very clearly regulated, certainly in the UK context, and therefore it kind of makes sense that they've been more of a tangible focus. Whereas, I think, perhaps some of the regulation around some wider environmental issues is developing. So I think there's a question here for businesses about, are they taking a regulation only approach, or are they going beyond regulation, and they're looking at actually what's coming down the track in terms of, the inevitabilities of global carbon tax and trade, and, some of the things that are bound to hit us all, at a balance sheet level sooner rather than later.
Absolutely, completely. I mean, you mentioned it before, Dirk, but how do both of you keep the passion alive? I mean, I just am overwhelmed by, you both sit on our steering group for our impact fund at Vivobarefoot, and we talk quite regularly around lots of different projects. I mean, maybe Dirk, you want to kind of jump in first, and I want to know how you seem to just get more passionate every day. I wonder how you keep that alive. How do you keep that drive alive?
How does it? That's a good question. I don't think about it very often, to be honest. Like, how do I stay motivated? Often it's when I see like our teams, run their programs, and I get to speak or mentor some of our founders, and I see the impact that they're having. Like, for example, in our impact program, we have a lot of environmental and socially focused impact businesses, whether they are charities, not-for-profits, community interest companies, or limited companies with an asset lock that are subscribing to changing the world just because they want to. And it's seeing what these businesses are doing by themselves. And I asked myself that question, like, if we know, if we were to kind of collect all the impact of all the kind of upstarts and existing businesses and the initiatives that they were running, would you be able to come up with some kind of metric or story of like how much force there is for good at the moment versus how much destruction and things going down the drain on the other side is happening? Will there be a tipping point? But all I know is that working on this side of the table of working and inspiring more purposeful businesses to start and grow, that's giving me a lot of passion and energy. Just seeing them kind of achieve their goals and achieve their their KPIs, etc. That's, I think, enough motivation for me to just keep going and kind of improving things or making things better, on a tiny scale, but consistently.
That really reminds me of that video of the guy who goes in, he starts dancing, and then one other person starts joining him dancing, and then a few more people start joining them dancing, and then there's a big festival before you know it. So maybe that's just your life in a nutshell. How about you?
I don't know. But you have to do stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just trying to find I've just finished reading Bob Langett's book, The Battle to Do Good, about his decades-long sustainability journey at McDonald's. And one of the quotes that stood out to me was around the importance of passion, and just having that as your kind of underlying driver. You need it. So I think that's my first point: is you kind of need it to do this work, and you can't let yourself be overwhelmed by the frustrations. And I mean, the negativities, because obviously you're going to come up against people who don't like what you're doing and don't like what you're saying. But ultimately, I think at the moment it's a great time to be in this space, because there is so much positivity and there are so many results. There is so much traction. And so I guess what feeds my positivity and my, perhaps some would say blind optimism, is just the every day, every business that comes to me and says, we want to go through B Corp, or, we've been through B Corp and now we want to develop a really proper sustainability strategy or net positive strategy. Those are all little wins that feed my energy. And this is a sector, this is a conversation that is full of positive energy at the moment. So I find it hard to get not too far knocked back.
I like that. I'm joining on a day where I've definitely been knocked back, so it's nice to be pulled up again by both of you and your energy. I'm really enjoying it. I mean, I guess my question following on the back of that would probably be, do you both believe that B Corp is going to keep converting people to become more like both of you. I mean, neither of you are kind of reformed, I guess, but we do tend to get a lot of people in sustainability these days that have seen how not to do it and then want to do it the right way. And I'm fascinated at the moment on your point, Tom, about how many messages we get at the moment of people that are desperate to work in sustainability. And I wonder how we can cope with that. And when you imagine the solution for us taking in all of that interest and all of that passion into this wider community, how do we need to transform?
I just think we need to embrace it. I think this is, I think that the face of the way we do business and the way we recruit and the way we think about the economy is changing, and we just need to lean into it. We need to keep doing what we're doing at a professional level. We need to, as businesses, recognize that these are not siloed issues. This is just the way that every business strategy should evolve. And we should just let it happen. And I'm a great believer in, you know, in just letting that evolution happen. It's underway. I'm totally convinced of it. You know, we're just playing our part to facilitate it and ease it along a bit.
Mm. I
It's
think
very
that's
relaxing.
a good shout.
It's really, really relaxing. I like that. Okay, so just keep waking up every day and keep doing it. Is that according to John?
What else can you do? What else can you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. Yeah, go on, Dirk.
It's, you know, I see it also on a family level, like how we make purchasing decisions. A lot can be done with you as a person, an individual, like, you know, how you impact your surroundings and the people around you with your statements around what you buy and what you don't buy, the stuff that you got fixed recently, you know, like it's a lot about storytelling, and how do we get better at storytelling on both an individual level and about the personal choices we make around consumption. And how do we get better at storytelling on an organizational level, that the way we're doing business at the moment is still needing to change? And how do we get better at storytelling about the big things that are happening, you know, from the B Corp movement to kind of, you know, rewilding, you know, various areas that have gone under environmental challenges. Like, how do we keep telling better stories? Because as human beings, stories are hardwired into our brains, and, you know, we need to use this again to kind of drive change forward by telling better and telling more stories about a different world, a better world, as opposed to looking at what's wrong with it.
Yeah, that's really true, actually. It just made me feel really inadequate on this podcast, actually, because I've just like asked the questions that I want to know from both of you guys rather than telling the story of how you kind of ended up where you are.
Well, can I just debunk that, Emma? Because everything you're doing and talking about is fantastic. I think for me, the key to those stories, and in fact, the key to a lot of this, particularly that sort of how do you keep the passion alive, is authenticity. You know, a lot just comes back to that single concept of, you know, the work we're doing, the way we feel about this direction of travel just feels right, and it feels better, and it feels more aligned with who we are as humans within a sort of wider natural system. And so I think if we can tell the stories like that, if we can do our work in alignment with that sort of bigger universal picture, then it is bound to be, you know, and we're not sort of constantly fighting against what's natural or what we feel inside, then it is going to happen much more easily.
It's funny that you say that, because I had a situation today where I had someone kind of encourage me not to get so personally connected to my job. And I just, you know, my response to that just had to be, it's never going to be me. That's just never going to be me. And I'm surprised if anyone can really say that is going to be them, because as you said, you know, Dirk, we wake up every day, we're in this thing all day. We're aware of the realities around us in the world now. If we aren't personally connected to what we spend 5 days a week doing, plus, and ultimately what we imagine our future to be, then how else can you show up? How can you live, I guess? So I am certainly, as you are, Tom, very inspired by how B Corp can enable that in these organizations, and I hope that we can ideally make it more viral. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to just add on B Corp month? Any shout outs, any kind of redirections back to anything you're working on? Dirk, do you want to start?
Yeah, like we are currently we're currently building a new 3-year program to support more impact businesses to get started and to get growing. And for us, we've seen what's possible. Like last year, we supported 39 new and growing and scaling impact businesses to scale. And we've seen a lot of interest now also coming from funders and investors who want to be part of that solution, who want to be part of that movement. And I think it's an invitation for people to just engage with us and to engage with Tom, engage with you around, any questions or any doubts that they might have, or, there are no silly questions, because I think we're all in it together. And I think it's a very collaborative environment where people are trying to help each other. And I think that's really kind of exciting. People who have questions, investors, funders, come ask questions.
But above all, just get on with it. Just get on the bus. If it feels right, do it. And I'm just inspired every day by the clients we work with. You are all amazing. Vivo, what you're doing there is brilliant. And you're all businesses who've just made the decision that this feels right. This is just the way to do things. And let's resolve those questions that Dirk's referring to, but let's just set this as the direction of travel. And that is what everyone should just get on and do.
That's cool. I like it. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, guys. And I'll put some links on the podcast to where everyone can check out what you do and where to find you in more detail if they have any questions and want to know more about what you do. So thank you very much. Happy B Corp month to both of you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Sustain This with Vivobarefoot. If you have any questions for Tom or Dirk, or you want to let us know anything else, get in touch at sustainthis@vivobarefoot.com.